Hey, this is Coach Jim McGannon, and I'm here with Coach Steve Erny. This is an attempt at a podcast where we discuss youth sports and basketball in particular. It's kind of a neat medium, and we're looking forward to it. Our topic here in our first podcast is something we call league fatigue, where so many kids and parents travel a lot, and they play in leagues and tournaments when for the vast majority of these kids, the exact opposite is what's required. So anyway, we're happy to be here. Nice to have you here, Coach.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to using this as a way for us to talk about a lot of the issues that are out there in youth sports and basketball. And I think the role that we can play at Basics is to discuss these things. Some of these things that can be hard for people to hear, but I think are important. So let's get right into it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we talked about in planning this was the fact that kids are often forced to compete before they have sharp skills. Some of these kids don't even have modest skills. For example, they can't dribble with their weak hand.
Yeah.
They can't jump stop and get the ball up. They can't create space with their feet. They haven't been shown these things. So as a result, when they compete, it's a foregone conclusion what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to the kind of the idea that when you're younger, especially, we're talking youth basketball primarily right now, but this all goes all the way through the high school levels, really. But especially with the youth basketball, when there are kids who kind of get thrown out there as the only learning opportunity is playing in the game, and when there's young kids who are playing in the game and they know, and their confidence isn't there and their skills aren't there, it can actually be playing in the game can have more of a negative effect, let alone a neutral effect, and certainly cannot be a positive thing. We often equate that to having, the game is your test, and it's, can you pass the test? Can you ace the test? Can you succeed? And a lot of times there's, unfortunately, too many games being used as preparation for the test. So that's like taking a test to succeed at a test, which doesn't make any sense. You need to study. You need to work on your skills. You need to have those skills in place to a certain extent to then try to execute them under pressure in a game situation, which is important to have those situations to practice. But the weight towards gameplay versus skill development is often out of whack, for sure.
Well, we've talked about this. Competition is often confused with competitive growth. The two are barely related. Many parents and even some coaches believe kids will improve with competition. You just touched upon it. This is an ugly fact. Kids often get worse with competition. Can you imagine if a parent actually understood that signing his or her kid up for competition would actually impede their growth? It actually happens. I mean, the kids don't have the skills. They get into these kind of high-strung, high-level competition games. People are paying admission to get into these games. There's referees, and the kid can't even dribble with his left hand, let alone have proper shooting form or decent foot skills. So it's what we're about at Basics. We really do believe skills come first. They do. You have to have the skill first before you can compete.
Yeah, and the emphasis on winning is always there. I mean, this is sports, and you play sports to win and lose. But when we get to the younger kids, a lot of times the emphasis on winning is more about the coaches or the parents or the adults in the room who want that more than even the kids sometimes, and the kids think they want it, but that can be a negative thing. When you are in a league or when you're doing things where the whole goal is to win as opposed to getting better, that can be a negative thing. That kind of goes back to thinking of, and this is something that I think is important to think about your kid's player development as a player. Like, let's say you're a parent and you have a fourth grade son or a fourth grade daughter, or just a young player who you obviously, from now until they get to high school, you want to have the best development for them, help them reach their potential. So what options do you have? Well, there's a lot of options out there. And player development is like a diet. You want to have a balanced diet. You want to make sure that your kid is getting the necessary development skill-wise. You do want them to learn how to play in games, because that's something that can't be simulated. You can't really simulate a game, but you also want to make sure that they have the skills. So you have to balance those things. And a lot of based on our experience and my experience and things I've seen, a lot of the options out there for parents, for their kids, weigh heavily, and the importance is placed on those Saturday games, or the importance is placed on those 3 or 4 games you play on Saturday, and then you practice maybe once or twice a week, but the practices are gearing for the games. And so the balance is out of whack. You're eating too much of one thing, and that can be unhealthy. Even too much of a good thing can be unhealthy. And so we really want to try to help kids understand, and parents, that there needs to be a balance struck, and we think certainly the balance should be weighed slightly, if not more than slightly, towards developing as a player with your skill, with understanding footwork, understanding ball handling, vision, shooting. And there's been a lot of professional players in recent years even speaking out, noticing this, that even the highest level of players in our country that go to the NBA or that become Division I players seem to be lacking in certain areas of skill. And many people, many credible, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, these people who certainly have reached the top of this sport, they've said that the AAUs and the leagues that are going on at the national level are a big problem with this, because the balance is out of whack between skill development and playing games.
We've done this for years. There's several drills that will tell us right away where these kids are at from a skills perspective. One is the McGannon drill. Those parents and players that attend basics know we do this drill all the time, and we attach a number to it. So we know what average is, we know what above average is, we know what excellence is, and we know what the records are. So an example, just as an example for 5th and 6th graders, the record is 31. Can the kid make, if they break the record, it would be more than 31 makes in a minute. The number of 5th and 6th graders who can't even get into the 20s is a huge number. We're talking 70, 80% of the kids can barely even break 20. So how does that relate to the game? Well, they can't score. That's why. They can't get near the rim. They can't use their left hand. They'll get their shot blocked a lot because they're not using the correct pivot foot. One of the biggest challenges we face is it's a misunderstanding that the competition will help these kids improve. We touched upon it already. Let's play in this league. Let's travel down to Kalamazoo and play over there. Let's play in all these different leagues. And as I said, for the vast majority of these kids, it'll be detrimental to their growth. So.
Yeah, no, I think that can be a hard thing to understand. I think people see it as they're playing basketball, they're in the gym, they're doing basketball. There's a ball in their hands every once in a while, and they hopefully through some sort of osmosis they can become better players. When a lot of times it just takes hours in the gym, the ball's in your hands all the time, you're working on the details and getting precise training, and not just one thing as a coach myself is there is a problem oftentimes with the off-season leagues, especially for the younger players, that because the emphasis is on winning and competing more than it is on development, a lot of times I've even heard this said, and this is from the youth coaches, that there are, we're getting ready to play, so the time spent with plays and the time spent preparing for, out of bounds plays and set plays and things like that, that takes up a lot of the practice versus footwork, vision, ball handling drills, shooting drills. And then because maybe they don't feel like there's time, right? The time is always a factor. Well, then when these kids end up going to middle school or they go to high school and they're on their high school teams, which run for 4 or 5 months of the year, the high school coaches might say the same thing. Our time is so limited. If you don't know how to jump stop at this point, you're kind of going to get left behind. So it's this vicious cycle of, if the emphasis is always throughout the year placed on winning, okay, when does the kid get to really experiment and work on his or her game? When is the time right for these kids to take less time with getting ready for the competition and more time with their own skills? Otherwise, the cycle will continue, and then pretty bad players are produced through the current system of leagues, and then of course the school teams, and so by the time someone's a junior or sophomore or even a senior, it's like, man, the kid can't use his left hand, or the kid just will not go to his left. How does that happen, right? I'm sure that question's been asked by many a high school coach or many a parent, and it's a lot of times it's because of this cycle of emphasis more on competition.
Well, we talk about this with the parents and the kids. Basketball is the most highly skilled game of all. We'll have some arguments from baseball coaches and soccer coaches. There's no comparison. No sport combines foot skills, hand skills, vision skills, lateral movement, jumping, use of the inside foot, use of both hands, getting the ball up, shooting a leather ball to an iron goal. It's a very difficult game, let alone the number of possessions, the shortness of the court, the fact that only 5 kids get to play at a time. In basketball, there's, unlike some of these other sports, there's no way to hide. You immediately know when a kid can't play.
Yeah.
So it's important, it's critical if they want to compete. We have a phrase, competition and winning, they're on different planets, right? Only a few teams and a few players actually win. Everybody competes, right? As if competition is going to lead to winning. Right. So it's something we hope that this podcast can clarify and make clear that it's a wonderful game, but boy, those skills got to come first.
Yeah, I think that's so. I guess it kind of comes down to, if someone's listening to this and it's a parent and it's okay, well, what are some of the signs that maybe my kid is not in a positive situation developmentally, or that what we're currently doing is not the best situation for my kid to develop. I think every parent wants the best for his or her kids. Every parent would say that's true, and we understand that. But sometimes it's either it's just the status quo that people go with, and that's what's out there, or it's an understanding of recognizing what's positive and what's negative about this team, or what's positive and negative about this league. So what are some of those signs that you've seen, at least in your time?
Well, it's pretty obvious. I mean, some of them are simple. If you come into the gym and you're playing on a team and there's too many kids on that team, your kid's not going to get as much playing time. Basically, there should never really be more than 10 kids on a team. 10 is ideal because it's 5-on-5. A lot of times kids can't miss. For our spring teams, for example, we take 12, but then when we play in tournaments, we cut the team in half. So there's 2 teams of 6, or one kid might fill in, you might get 7. Right. A telltale sign is a kid sitting.
Yeah.
How often is your kid sitting when they're in the gym or not being active? Another telltale sign, when they're actually practicing, how many kids are in a line preparing to do a drill, a dribble drill, for example, or the mic-in or jump stop drills? There should never be more than 2 kids in the line, because the repetitions are required, and these kids, you don't want to lose their attention. You've got to keep them engaged, keep them involved.
Right.
And that's another telltale sign. You have a couple, too, that you can speak to.
Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier before this podcast, I wanted to mention it was, I think a negative sign too is if the league that you're in, there's, I don't know, 3 to 5, sometimes more games in a day or a weekend, and there's a lot of things wrong with that. There are people a lot smarter than me who know about the health risks that go along with that. And maybe that's a topic for a different day, but maybe we can touch on that. But the other thing that as a coach, I think gets overlooked by parents and kids, but the coaches, I think there's a consensus here that a lot of times when you play so many games throughout the course of a year, we're talking off-season games, we're talking league games, we're talking 5-6 games a day, that the value of a game goes down. And it's kind of just basic common sense. You know, the more you have of something, the less value those individual things are. So the more games you play, the less value is placed on each game. You know, maybe don't give your best effort because you have 3 more games that day. That can build a dangerous habit for kids for when you do play with your teams of the school and you are in a game that kind of means something, maybe more than just individually, but it means something to the school or to the community or to your buddies and your teammates that you've grown up with, that the value of that game can be a lack of emphasis and maybe even not wanting to win, but understanding how important each minute and each second of a game can be.
We have a simple phrase: less is more, and it's difficult to get this and to understand it. When you have that many games and you're there for such an extended period of time, it loses its value. So we don't believe in ever there being more than 2 games in a day. In fact, you and I have had some interesting conversations. We've gone to play in some local tournaments and we've been told, oh, your team has 3 games today and 4 games this day. And we actually say to the administrators, we only want 2 games. We don't want more than 2 games. And their reactions are, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't want? What do you mean you don't want 3 or 4 games? Because, well, health issues, injuries. How about spending an entire day on a Saturday or Sunday, especially in the summertime, in gorgeous Michigan, in some hot gym, when the reality is if they played 1 or 2 games, worked their butts off, and then got back to swimming in the lake, it would be more beneficial to their development. So,
I think that's a real thing for sure.
It really is.
There's also, other telltale signs. Just another simple thing, and we've really hit on this one, but winning is emphasized more than skill development. If you feel like your kid is in a situation where the coaches and the practices are, and maybe you don't know how to recognize these, whether it is or not, but sometimes it's really obvious. When winning is emphasized more than skill development in the off season, that can be a sign that maybe it's not the most positive potential situation for your kid. Coaching can be punitive in those senses, in those ways. It can be almost a negative reactions from coaches because of the pressure to win. But again, that can hinder more than it can help. You
can Google it. I tried to find it the other day. Greg Popovich, who I think is probably the best coach in the NBA, there was a timeout recently in the last year or so that some of these timeouts get filmed. And he's basically berating his team, the Spurs. And this is exactly what he said. I don't care if we win this game or not. The way we're playing is unsustainable. We cannot win by being selfish. So here's one of the best coaches in the league right now, essentially saying the outcome of this game doesn't really have any meaning. What matters is, can we learn? Can we sustain our growth and try to compete as a team? So that's one example at the highest level. We're talking 10 levels below that now with these 5th and 6th graders, middle school, high school players who don't understand this.
Sure, and then going with that, let's say a 5th grader, so that was the San Antonio Spurs, that message. With the 5th graders, sometimes it can, if you truly focus on skill development and not winning at the 5th grade level, and you run less plays and you try to teach them more how to play, right? Then it can be ugly at first. It is a long like we said before, basketball is a tough sport to learn the right way to play it, learn how to, and so it can be it's a long game is what it is. And we're talking about throughout the years. Good coaches play the long game from 5th grade through high school, college, whatever. Be willing to not cut corners to win, or like Greg Popovich would say, to not have to care too much whether we win this particular game, but are we building the right habits with our kids for the long haul? For him, it might be the winning an NBA championship. For this fifth grade, it might be, okay, making the 7th and 8th grade team, or making the high school team, or maybe if they're going to make the team, being a good enough of a player in high school to develop and really help their team win. It can be it can be kind of rough watching if you really let 5th graders or 3rd graders or 4th graders sort of let them go and teach them rules instead of putting them in spots and telling them this is what you do every time down the floor. That might make a possession look a little cleaner and look a little more organized, but it's not going to teach the kid how to play the game in the long run.
We've seen youngsters say to us, we've learned this play or that play, we're supposed to run to this spot, and then when this pass is made, we're supposed to cut over here and set a screen. Well, how many times is that play going to break down at the 5th and 6th grade level almost immediately? Yet the kid feels he or she has to be in that spot. Anyway, it's a mess. It's just not not a happy situation. One of the things that we also have touched upon as well, and this is in every community, there are elements of youth basketball where the parents are sort of directed into this, what this group of kids is going to do on this team, and there might be another group over here that's going to do this. The parents, and this is difficult because a lot of them don't understand basketball, we have a phrase, there's power in no. Try to understand what's best for your kid. And we always point to the coach. I don't know who these coaches are. The parents should identify who these coaches are and make sure that they're positive role models. They won't be yelling and screaming at their children. They emphasize skill development first. It's sometimes these people might be friends or family members. It's not an easy situation. Right. But it's important that, no is okay. And we've had several parents come to us and say, we just feel we have to do this because we're told this is the direction we have to go in, and the kid is not even breaking 15 on the Mikan drill. So that's not an easy thing to do.
No. We live in a world where there's just so many choices, which is a good thing. I suppose it's better than not having any choices or having only one option out there. But in some ways it can make things tough for parents. So, with that being said, I mean, as we want to,
we're going to wind down and
wrap up here.
Yep.
I think, and I'll just say this: there are so many choices out there. We talk about how what we do at Basics is one of many choices. It can be your primary choice. It could even be a choice that you see as a good option for when you can come and work on your skills. But it is a choice, and we want to make sure at least that parents recognize that you have a choice. It's not, especially when your kids are young, it's not something that I have to, this is the only way to get my kid to succeed. The only way to get my kid seen or noticed by the high school coaches or by the college coaches that we might like to see if our kid can go to someday. So there's a lot of choices out there, and parents are faced with those choices, but they're there, and we're certainly one of them.
Well, we talked about this prior to the podcast. To us, the school basketball is the most important basketball. You're on a school team. You're representing that school, especially into high school where there's media coverage. There's tremendous pride that some of these communities take in their teams in every sport. So our focus is helping your son or daughter not just make their school team, but to be able to compete and have meaningful minutes and participate in the outcome. We talk about competitive habits. A habit, everybody knows what that is. Executing something with no thought. A competitive habit is when you can do that, execute something with no thought, even when there's a kid in your face and draped over you. You can still execute that skill under pressure. So that's what we're about. We have almost 100 kids now at the collegiate level. We're proud of that, and we hope that this podcast has made some impact, and we look forward to addressing other topics. So it was fun, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
All right.